What will happen to Donald Trump if faith disputes fuel deeper divisions? In a nation already split down the middle, faith has once again become a political battlefield, and Donald Trump is right in the center of it. From campaign rallies that blur the line between religion and politics to fiery disputes over whose values define America, Trump has leaned heavily on faith-based rhetoric to rally his base. But what happens when these disputes don't unite, but instead deepen the divisions tearing this country apart? Could this strategy backfire, pushing away moderates and intensifying resistance from those who see his tactics as a threat to democracy itself? The stakes couldn't be higher for Trump, for his movement, and for America's fragile political fabric. Stay tuned as we break it down right now. The central question posed by this analysis is straightforward yet deeply unsettling. What will happen to Donald Trump if faith disputes fuel deeper divisions in the United States? The issue is not merely hypothetical. In an already polarized country, religious identity and disputes around prayer, morality, public safety, and cultural conflict serve as accelerants on an already burning fire. The transcript from Caroline Leavitt's disastrous press briefing provides an unfiltered window into how Trump's White House communicates, where faith is positioned not just as a matter of personal belief, but as a central political weapon. The implications extend well beyond a single event. If faith disputes grow more intense, they have the potential to fracture Trump's base, inflame opposition, destabilize governance, and redefine the contours of American democracy itself. The press conference by Caroline Leavitt reveals much more than scripted talking points. It is a microcosm of Trump's strategy, vulnerabilities, and the way faith disputes are woven into political messaging. From the beginning, she attempted to frame Trump as a champion of workers and national identity. Yet the questions quickly spiraled into contentious areas: shootings linked to ideological motivations, accusations of disrespect toward prayer, violence in Chicago, and debates over police recruitment. The most revealing moments came when Leavitt defended prayer against critics such as Jen Psaki and invoked tens of millions of Americans of faith as an electoral shield. This rhetorical move, equating faith with Trump's political legitimacy, underscores the danger. If faith disputes sharpen, the administration is forced to double down on religious identity politics. In doing so, it risks alienating secular voters, intensifying divisions within religious communities themselves, and elevating faith disputes into existential political conflicts. This chaotic pressure therefore functions as a case study. It shows that once religion becomes central to political defense, every dispute around prayer, shootings, or morality is no longer local or cultural. It becomes a test of loyalty to Trump himself. That is a volatile and unsustainable formula. Trump's relationship with faith has always been transactional. He does not have a long personal history of church engagement or theological thought. Instead, he has weaponized religious symbolism as a political instrument. Evangelicals in particular have been cultivated not through doctrinal alignment, but through political deals, judges, policies against abortion rights, symbolic gestures such as moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. The presser transcript shows how this relationship is maintained. Leavitt invoked prayer as proof of respect for American faith. The logic was simple but revealing. Criticizing thoughts and prayers is not just cultural commentary, but an insult to millions of voters whose loyalty Trump depends on. That loyalty, however, is fragile. When faith becomes politicized to such an extent, any internal dispute, Catholics versus evangelicals, conservative pastors versus more progressive congregations, or theological disagreements around gender and sexuality, can fracture the coalition. Trump's reliance on faith identity thus becomes both his armor and his vulnerability. It protects him against accusations of negligence or insensitivity by wrapping him in the mantle of religious values. Yet it also places him at the mercy of disputes he cannot control. When pastors argue about whether prayer is enough, when communities divide over gender identity, when churches split over political endorsements, Trump becomes implicated. If the divisions deepen, he risks standing at the center of an implosion rather than at the head of a movement. The United States has always struggled with the role of religion in public life. The First Amendment protects both free exercise and the separation of church and state, yet those principles collide in practice. Trump's approach exacerbates these tensions. By tying faith to his administration's legitimacy, he transforms disputes that might otherwise be contained within congregations or activist circles into national political crises. Consider the questions raised at the presser. Should trans ideology be classified as domestic terrorism? Should parents or therapists be held legally responsible for the actions of shooters? Should political leaders dismiss or elevate the power of prayer? These are not abstract debates. They are flashpoints in a cultural war already stretching America's political institutions to the breaking point. The risk is that polarization around faith does not remain symbolic. It filters into legislation, law enforcement priorities, and judicial appointments. Each side interprets the other not as political opponents, but as moral enemies. In such a climate, Trump's survival strategy, weaponizing division, becomes perilous. If the disputes become too bitter, they may fracture even his own support base, creating a situation where his mobilization of faith ends up diminishing his coalition instead of expanding it. A particularly alarming dimension emerges when faith disputes intersect with violence. The transcript highlights repeated questions about shootings linked to identity, including attacks on Christians and Catholic children. When prayer is invoked as the primary response, critics perceive denial, while supporters see respect for tradition. This divide is not merely rhetorical. It shapes security policy and public trust in law enforcement. The administration risks a dangerous cycle. By downplaying gun reform and emphasizing faith responses, it appears disconnected from material realities of violence. Yet by acknowledging ideological dimensions such as trans identity or religious targeting, it risks inflaming stigma and intensifying threats. Either path fuels anger. The more divisive the framing, the greater the likelihood that individuals on the margins will interpret rhetoric as justification for violence. For Trump, the danger is twofold. On the one hand, he can be accused of neglecting public safety by hiding behind prayer and faith rhetoric. On the other, he risks bearing responsibility for radicalization if supporters interpret his framing as validation of aggression against perceived enemies. In both cases, faith disputes that intensify violence undermine his credibility as a leader capable of restoring order. The presser was widely described as humiliating, chaotic, and disastrous. That media framing matters. Trump has long thrived on spectacle, but repeated humiliations can corrode the narrative of strength. When faith disputes dominate coverage, the story is no longer about governance, but about division. Public perception is influenced less by policy detail and more by emotional tone. When Caroline Leavitt appeared defensive about prayer, when she struggled to answer questions on shootings, when she framed faith as the ultimate political defense, she inadvertently reinforced the perception of an administration retreating into culture war rhetoric instead of offering solutions. Trump himself thrives on this conflict-driven dynamic, but there is a risk of overexposure. If faith disputes dominate too many press cycles, undecided voters begin to see a leader trapped in culture wars rather than a president addressing economic or security needs. That perception may not matter in a deeply polarized electorate, but it matters in swing states where elections are won or lost. American history provides sobering parallels. In the 19th century, disputes between Protestant and Catholic communities fueled riots and political realignments. In the 20th century, battles over school prayer, abortion, and civil rights reshaped party coalitions. Each time, religion acted as a powerful mobilizer, but also as a source of deep fractures. Trump's strategy resembles past efforts to fuse faith and politics, but with a distinctive difference. He relies more heavily on faith disputes as a defensive tool rather than a long-term moral vision. This makes his strategy brittle, whereas past movements rooted their religious politics in institutions and doctrines. Trump roots his in loyalty to himself. That personalization magnifies the risks. If faith disputes deepen, there is no institutional buffer. The dispute becomes not just about values, but about Trump's legitimacy. It is easy to treat faith disputes as cultural noise, but they carry economic and social consequences. Companies hesitate to invest in regions defined by cultural instability. Communities divided along religious lines struggle to coordinate on education, healthcare, and local governance. Social trust erodes, making it harder to solve collective problems. For Trump, the economic dimension is particularly dangerous. His promise to workers, repeated at the press conference, rests on creating stability and dignity for American labor. Yet if his administration is seen as inflaming religious divisions, the opposite occurs. Investors perceive risk, workers face instability, and communities fracture. The rhetoric of faith as national strength begins to collapse under the weight of economic and social weakness. If faith disputes continue to fuel deeper divisions, several scenarios emerge for Trump's future. Scenario 1. Consolidation of a narrow but intense religious base. Trump may retain loyalty among evangelicals and conservative Catholics, enough to dominate primaries but insufficient to win general elections. Scenario 2. Fragmentation within religious communities. Disputes over gender, sexuality, and prayer may divide churches themselves. Some leaders may break with Trump, weakening his coalition from within. Scenario 3. Escalation of violence tied to religious rhetoric. If shootings or attacks linked to identity disputes increase, Trump may be blamed either for inaction or for stoking division. This would erode his credibility as a leader of law and order. Scenario 4. Fatigue among undecided voters. If every press cycle centers on faith disputes rather than economic solutions, moderate voters may disengage from Trump's message entirely, perceiving him as a candidate of conflict rather than resolution. Scenario 5. Institutional backlash. Courts, state governments, and business leaders may resist policies framed around religious disputes, further isolating Trump politically and economically. Each of these scenarios highlights the central risk. Faith disputes are not a stable political foundation. They are volatile accelerants. If they deepen, they do not strengthen Trump's position. They corrode it. The disastrous press conference by Caroline Leavitt illustrates the risks of leaning too heavily on faith as political defense. What might appear as a gesture of solidarity with millions of believers instead exposes the administration to new vulnerabilities. Every faith dispute becomes a test of loyalty, every cultural flashpoint becomes a political battlefield, and every question about prayer becomes a referendum on Trump himself. If faith disputes continue to fuel deeper divisions, Trump's political future is precarious. He may consolidate a loyal base, but that base risks shrinking as divisions multiply. He may weaponize prayer and cultural rhetoric, but in doing so, he risks being blamed for violence, instability, and erosion of national unity. He may survive in the short term through polarization, but the long-term consequence is unsustainable. What will happen to Donald Trump in such a scenario? He will face a future where every prayer becomes political, every dispute becomes personal, and every division threatens to collapse the very coalition he depends on. The broader implication for America is equally sobering. When faith becomes a weapon rather than a bridge, the divisions it fuels can undermine not only a presidency, but the stability of democracy itself.